Good evening, guys. It's good to be back on my page. Yeah, I'm always being blocked, and that's because my message is very controversial. And it's very controversial for a purpose and a reason. We need to awaken each other to the realities of the world that we live in. We need to awaken ourselves to the realities of what we need to do if we're going to ensure that our children are going to have a better future, a better country in which they understand what is important. And this brings me to my topic for tonight. We don't want another Lobengula moment in Zimbabwe. We don't want Mnangagwa to become the new Lobengula in an era in which we as Africans are now educated and can't afford to be signing an X on a contract that we don't understand. And this brings me to a video that I made last week, and a lot of people were complaining to say, you don't even give this government a chance, you're already talking. You're already giving issue. Well, the truth of the matter is we can't keep quiet, because it is within these moments that contracts are being made in change that Lobengula moments happen. It is in these times where our leaders are under pressure to make decisions for the benefit of the nation that our leaders will make contracts for the proverbial sugar. And because we have learned this in the past, we need to speak. So a lot of people are saying, give this administration time. But we remember that when Lobengula was given time by the Ndebele people, when they allowed him to make contracts with Helms and the advice of people like Lotshe, he ended up selling the nation, putting an X onto a piece of paper in which he sold all his land and all its resources, plus the labor of his own people, for sugar, for small-time benefit, and for morphine that was being used to treat his leg. We cannot afford this now. So it is in this time that Zimbabwe is in a transition, that we are changing, and Mnangagwa is under pressure to make decisions, to make contracts in which he has not consulted his people, he has not had any advisors besides the Lotshe, who is Mutsvangwa, that we need to be careful of the contracts that we sign there. Because it is those contracts that are going to bind our children in the same way that Lobengula's agreements are still binding us today. And if you remember very well, the same thing happened in South Africa. South Africans felt that let Nelson Mandela and his people negotiate a contract for us, negotiate a deal that is going to make us happy through CODESA. And him and his advisors like Cyril Ramaphosa sold the nation, allowed the Afrikaners and the apartheid government to keep all the proceeds that they acquired through apartheid, so that in turn they could get jobs, they could get GMOs, they could get credit for nice cars, nice houses, and money for BEE deals. Till today, 23 years down the lane, South Africa is still paying the price for the negotiation that was done by Nelson Mandela and his Lotshe, which was Cyril Ramaphosa. And if you remember, the moment that Robert Mugabe accepted that he had resigned, the very first thing that the British government did was to send the Minister of African Affairs, I'd like to call him the Minister of Colonial Affairs, to come running into Zimbabwe to sit and speak to our leaders. The objective of that is to do exactly what happened to Lobengula, to rush him into a decision, to rush Mnangagwa into decisions, into signing contracts, into putting an X on contracts that are going to give him sugar instead of giving him long-term benefit. And we give away our land, we give away our resources, our gold, in exchange for sugar, in exchange for jobs, in exchange for a bit of credit and a bit of debt, in exchange for nice cars and having BMW setting itself up in Zimbabwe. That's what we'll be exchanging for our resources, for our land, for our children's inheritance. I refuse to sit and be another Lobengula. That's why I speak. That's why I want us to put pressure on this government to talk to its people, to sit down with its citizens, to sit down with those in the diaspora and have a conversation about what it is that Zimbabwe needs. Mutsvangwa said that we need capital. And if we need capital, we need to go to the centers of capital. We need to go to London. We need to go to Tokyo. We need to go to New York, Frankfurt, the capital centers. And that's where we're going to get money to develop Zimbabwe. That sounds good. It sounds real, but is it true? The very first thing that I find problematic is Mutsvangwa doesn't even seem to recognize that the capital that you find in London, the capital that you find in Tokyo, is all American Rothschild capital. It's all British and American capital. That is what the New Deal was about. That is what the Marshall Plan was about. But why wasn't Africa giving the Marshall Plan if developing Africa was an objective? That is because developing Africa is not an objective, because Africa's got resources. They want you to crave the paper. They want you to need the paper so that you can give your resources in exchange for this paper. And so is it a good idea for us to go to these capital centers? To these capital centers that are carrying American capital if we want to develop? The question we need to ask ourselves is, let us look at the examples of places that have got American capital in which black people are found. And let's find out if black people have been developed by this capital. When you look, you realize that you'll find it very difficult to find any black country that is developed. But then you will find maybe that the African Americans are the only society that has benefited from American capital, or shall we say, from the capital of the capital centers of the world. They are the richest black people in the world. They are the richest black people coming in as a nation at number 11 richest nation in the world. But have they really been developed? Has American capital, has capital from the world centers developed black Americans? I want to look at some statistics. The statistics tell us that 65% literacy rate for black people in America. These very rich African Americans have got a 65% literacy rate and a 35% illiteracy rate. Zimbabwe has a literacy rate of 85%. Of all the land that is in America, and you need to understand that African Americans have been in America for 300 years plus. They've been building that nation. They've been farming that nation. They've been building the roads. They've been building the cities. But they only own 0.3% of all the land in America. We come from there and you find out, what about the wealth? African Americans constitute 15% of the population, but they only have less than 1.75% of the economy, of the wealth that is in America. They say that the household wealth of America is $85 trillion. And African Americans control less than 1.75% of that wealth at $1.4 trillion. I don't know if you really see what this means, where 15% of the population control less than 2% of the wealth of the nation. That tells you a story. And these are people that are living in the center of Western capital, the center that we want to go to. African Americans are not even as literate as Zimbabweans. African Americans do not own as much land as Zimbabweans. African Americans do not control any much of their population. We come from there and we also find out that of all black families in America, 35% have no net worth, or they've got a negative net worth. They have no net worth in the richest country on earth, in a country that controls 85 trillion in household wealth. I'm not even talking about the wealth in companies. I'm not even talking about the wealth in investments. The African American has got 35% of its population that do not have any net worth. What that means is that your grandmother, your grandfather who's got 2 chickens is automatically worth more than the basic African American. Your grandfather, your grandmother, or villager in Zimbabwe that has got cows, goats, anything of exchange actually has more net worth and value than an African American, than 35% of African Americans. Then we go and say 15% again of the total number of African Americans have a net worth that is less than $6,000. So 50% of African Americans have got a net worth that is $6,000 and below. And of that, 25% of African Americans are living in poverty. 45% of African American children are born into poverty. This is the nation that has got the capital that we as Africans want. They can't even develop their own African Americans. And the difference between African Americans and Zimbabweans is that African Americans actually have created inventions. Many African Americans have innovated. And with that innovation, with all the music, all the movies, everything you see in America, they still only control 1.75% of the economy, yet they are 15% of the population. Then you believe that American capital that can't even develop African Americans, American capital that is built off going to steal oil from Iraq, from Libya, from Syria, and the world over, from killing as many people as possible in order to control the economies, after creating all that wealth, they can't even give 2% of that wealth to African Americans, but you believe that this capital is going to come to Zimbabwe and is going to develop Zimbabwe and is going to lift your people. Tell me that makes sense. I can't even give you statistics of the United Kingdom because they don't even talk about black wealth in the United Kingdom, because black people just constitute 1.3% of the population. And I can guarantee you that they control less of a chunk of the economy than the African Americans. So you would find that the black people in the United Kingdom control less than 0.35% of that of the wealth of that economy. But these are the people we believe that they're going to come to Africa, come to the continent that they colonized, and they're going to develop it with capital and development. But they can't even develop the black people in their own nations, even though that benefits them with consumption wealth. My last point, African Americans control the wealth, household wealth, 1.75% of the household wealth of America, yet they constitute 15% of the population, but they consume more than 10% of the household production in America. I need you to understand where this is going. African Americans do not control any wealth in America, but they consume most of the consumption, more consumption than the wealth they own, enriching white capital more than they're able to create wealth for themselves. What does this mean? This means, and it justifies the reasons why African Americans were given a bit of money or a bit of development, is so that they could prop up the American system, the American capital system, by consuming. So this country will not enrich African Americans. It will not allow them to have net worth. It will have 35% of the African American population having zero net worth. It will have another 15% having less net worth than $600,000 US, and yet they still consume at least 10% of the output of American production. That means that they are allowed to have money to consume. They are allowed to take debt, which gives them the negative net worth, so that they can prop up and finance the financial system of the world. They can finance white capital. They can finance the capital of the centers of the world that Mutsvangwa wants us to go after. I hope this is an eye-opener to you. If Western capital cannot develop its own citizens, if it cannot develop its own black taxpayers, what are the chances that Western capital can leave the West and come and develop you as Zimbabwean and help you to become richer when they can't enrich their own people? What are the chances that they're going to allow you to build your own economy? It's almost nil, because you're a competitor. It's almost nil because they want your resources and they don't want you to have capacity to process those resources, because then you will have no reason for them. It's almost nil because all they need from you is your cheap labor to extract those resources, and those resources unprocessed. We need to reason. This is why we're sent to school. We need to think. So am I saying Mutsvangwa is wrong? Yes, I am saying Mutsvangwa is wrong. What's the solution? The solution is we need to start looking upon Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe. I refuse for us to talk about the diaspora first, yet Zimbabwe for 17 years was kept afloat by the Zimbabweans that remained in Zimbabwe. We need to talk to those brothers and sisters because they kept that country going. And we need to tell them that you are our first line of defense. You are our first level of investor. You are the first builders of this nation. Once we've talked to the Zimbabweans in Zimbabwe and told them how much we are proud of them, told them how much we're proud of their bumper harvest, told them how much we're proud of them for keeping Zimbabwe afloat at a time where sanctions were supposed to destroy it, at a time where some of us ran away from Zimbabwe. Yes, we earn capital. Yes, we earn money. But how many of us bring it back? Only after we've told them that they are the first line of defense, we tell them that they are the inventors, they are the investors, they are the people that we need to pay taxes, they are the people that are going to rise up that nation. They are the people that need to take their savings out of their wardrobes and they need to put it on the forefront of investment to develop that nation. Only after that can you look at us in the diaspora and start to appeal to us in the diaspora to also start bringing our savings home, to stop buying houses on debt where we live, to stop buying cars on debt where we live, to stop buying cell phones and spending money on champagnes and start saving it to send home for production. We are the second level of investor that our government needs to talk to. We are the second tier of people that are going to rise that nation up. We are the second tier of people that have been providing remittances that have kept the country going. But this time, our remittances must be used as investment. Our savings must not be saved where we live, but they need to be reinvested back home. We as Zimbabweans will rise that nation up if we put our minds to it. We as Zimbabweans shall be the first level of investor to invest in Zimbabwe if our government believes in us, if our nation starts to believe that we are the ones that shall rise Zimbabwe up. And after that, we shall decide to go for our African brothers and sisters. In a continent that we want to become one, in a continent that we need to rise, we will tell our African brothers and sisters that they are welcome into Zimbabwe. They are welcome as investors. The third and most important level of investors is them. We need them in our home. We need them to join us. We need them to get land. We need them to farm with us. We need them to partner with us because this is our continent. The resources of this continent shall not be let to go for green papers. The resources of this continent shall not be monopolized by Western capital because we're too lazy to work on it or because our leaders find paper more important than our resources. We need to go to them and tell them that. And then we go to the African American investor as the fourth tier of investor. We need them. There's holiday destinations here. There's land. There's opportunity to buy real estate, to buy property, to develop farms that they can't develop on 0.3% land that they own in America. But in Zimbabwe, they can own land. In Zimbabwe, we can give them land. In Zimbabwe, they can become investors in our land. They can have a house. They can have land. They can have all the beauty that they are not given by their own country, America, which continues to allow them to live in poverty. And only after we have dealt with the African diaspora, we have dealt with the Zimbabwean at home, we've dealt with the Zimbabwean in the diaspora and made them understand that they are the people that shall lift up Zimbabwe, only then will we accept foreign investment as a complement, as a top-up, not as our main source of development. The moment FDI becomes your center of development, you're under colonialism by capital. This is what we need to understand. The Lotshe that misinformed Lobengula is no different to the Lotshe who will tell Mnangagwa that foreign investment is more important than home-biased investment. We are the first tier of investors. We've got good jobs where we work. We've got good credit where we work. We must take that credit. We must reinvest it back home and develop our nation. We must stop this rhetoric that white people are the ones that shall lift up Africa. White people shall lift up Zimbabwe, because that's not true. Zimbabweans, Africans, African Americans, African diaspora is what is going to develop Africa, and we should be appealing to that capital as a first option and level of investment before we start going and talking to Europeans. Europeans have never developed us, and yet they've been in contact with us for more than 400 years. In fact, 500 years since slavery. They've never developed a black man. What makes you think they'll develop you today? And don't give me examples about Asia. Asia occupies a different strategic need for the Europeans. They are needed for their cheap labor, for manufacturing, for taking up and absorbing the what you call it, the pollution that Europe doesn't want anymore. That's why the factories have moved to Asia. Never compare yourself with the Asians because you are not Asians. Never compare yourselves to Asians because the economies are owned by the Americans anyway. All they are is cheap labor and a huge market of 3.5 billion people to absorb American production and keep American capital rich. Get informed, have some knowledge, and stop talking about foreign direct investment, because what you're doing is you're crying for colonization by capital. We can do it. We have the money. We have the brains. We can pay taxes. We can invest. We can make profit. We can reinvest. We can make jobs. We can create jobs. We can pool our capital. We can pool our capital in terms of crowd funds. We can grow crops. We can farm. We are professional. We have black excellence. And let's reach out to other black communities. Africans, our first level of investors. African Americans, our second level of investor. African diaspora, our fourth level of investment. And we as Zimbabweans, we're going to build Zimbabwe. Let us not become another Lobengula, selling our nation for sugar, selling our nation, selling our resources for green paper, selling our resources for a few jobs, selling our resources to have a BMW dealership in Zimbabwe. No, we need to manufacture our own cars. We need to buy Nigerian cars, Ghanaian cars. We need to accept Africans to start giving us the products that that we need, instead of having $465 billion of African capital leaving Africa for imports. Good night.